Okay, well, I want to be respectful of time. People will come and there's things I've learned from the fall webinar series is have a webinar and not a Zoom meeting, because that way I don't have to deal with microaggressions in the chat. Yeah. Not to say that people attending are here are microaggressive, right? It depends on the topic. But yeah.
Sometimes they're macroaggressive.
Right. Yeah, so I did see a chat, darn it. But yes, I want to welcome folks to the March break. I know it's break for many people, and I appreciate people in attendance able to log on, and the speakers and families and life providers, caregivers able to join us. I just want to update people in attendance. One of our speakers, due to the barometric pressure and that impacting migraines, is not able to join us tonight. So I'm very sad that Leroy was not able to be here as a Afro-Indigenous, Black Indigenous community member and a parent. I wish them well, and I hope that they heal quickly and don't feel too much. Okay, with that said, folks, we'll get started. Just to be an ethical person hosting space for the students in attendance and community members in the Dish with One Spoon, or wherever you're dialing in from and wherever your Wi-Fi allows you to dial in from. I want to provide resources that are nation state Canadian specific. Right, I can only go so far with research and information, and because this is through Wilfrid Laurier University, providing specific mental health supports at Wilfrid Laurier. Again, here's some 1-800 numbers. I cannot verify who they have working there that represents intersecting identities, but they're there, and I want to be an ethical person holding space on a conversation that is meant to be joy, but that can bring up feelings that might not happen now, but later, in an ethical and responsible way. For folks in attendance, for folks here to help remind us, because some people benefit from seeing what's going to happen and our time together, I'm going to create an opportunity for our relatives here to introduce themselves and what they feel is relevant, who they are, who their people are, who claims them, some of their responsibilities to paid work, unpaid work, community, the land, and why those things might be important. I might introduce myself. I'm tired of talking about myself. And then creating an opportunity for conversation and dialogue. If people are looking for something medical, that's not going to happen here. Relationships and relationality, talk about our own lived experiences with relation to tonight's topics, 2SLGBTQQIA families, and it's very wide open, right? And then opportunity, I usually like to take 30 seconds because I want to leave as much time for conversation for our relatives here to share generously with you folks in attendance to impact your practices, your services, and how you can, in a culturally safe, trauma-informed way, support 2SLGBTQQIA families, whether it's caregivers, whether it's parents, through family planning, or extended families, and to not be microaggressive, anti-Indigenous, racist, homophobic, transphobic. That's my desire in creating this dialogue and topic tonight. And also, why not in the middle of March break for some folks? I like to do things alphabetically just based on the first name, but it doesn't have to be that way. I'm also a clinician, so silence is good for me. It's a motivator, but I like to invite you folks to introduce yourselves. Again, a prompter. Who are you? Who are your people? Who claims you? What are some of your roles and responsibilities to paid work, community, the land?
Well, I can start. My name is Lwrds, pronounced Lwrds. My pronouns are they, them. I am an Afro-Indigenous visitor to Takaranto for half of my life now, migrant from territory now known as Peru. That is where my people are from, a coastal region, the city of Callao. I am an artist and an educator. Yes, and I think that is it for the intro.
I am Milo. My name is Milo. I was born here in Takaranto, lived here all my life, and my parents immigrated here from territories known as Peru as well. My pronouns are he, him, they, them, and currently I am working from home. I'm doing my I had like a food business pre-pandemic that I had to put on pause. So I've been doing some home-based kind of anything I could do to make income. So right now I'm operating some online store sales type work and caregiving.
Yes.
Our toddler nibbling has been a lot of labor, but good
labor. And we have been together for 6 years in the summer.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Frizzy.
Go ahead. Bonjour Nindinawe Maganidag, Zagati Kwe Indigenous, Bijune Dodem, Nin Nawe Nangwayabe, Bejik Mede, Onimu Pokosuin, Machif and Dao. So my name is Chantal Fiola. My pronouns are she, her. I am Machif, Red River Métis. My mom's family comes from the historic Métis community of Saint-Laurent, Manitoba. My dad comes from a French Catholic farming community called Saint Geneviève. I've got Métis ancestry for 7 generations. We also have Anishinaabe and Cree ancestry. I'm fortunate to live in Winnipeg, which is some of my ancestors lived in one of the Métis communities called Saint Vital. We're also from St. Boniface, and we were among the lucky ones, I guess, who, well, we stayed after a lot of the Métis ended up fleeing from the province of Manitoba when we confederated it. That's a whole story. Let's see, I'm an associate professor in urban and inner city studies at the University of Winnipeg. I'm also a mother and married to Nicki. My areas of specialization include Métis spirituality, also Indigenous conceptions of gender and sexuality. I'm an active member of our communities. I sit on the board for the Two Spirit Michif Local, which is a grassroots arm of the Manitoba Métis Federation. I'm also on the board for the Two Spirited People of Manitoba, and a few other commitments. I'm also really involved in some of the local spiritual communities. I think I'll leave it at that.
Tanche Kiawao, Nicki Dishnikasan, and Michif Desesprinia, Nimama Egua Baba Take in Michifnia, Lwrds Egua Saint Vital Dustin, a Riviere Rouge Niwikin. So I just said there, hello, my name is Nicki. I'm a two-spirit Métis woman, descended from, my mother and father are both descended from script-bearing Métis families. And I descended from lines of Métis matriarchs, including Sarah Goulet, who established the community of Lorette that I was raised in, and Margaret Poitras, who lived in the community of Saint Vital that I was also raised in as a teen. And so, my families have been able to maintain these ancestral relationships with land for generations, really. And so I'm grateful, to have been raised in those communities and to still live here and to maintain those things. And so I'm also chair of the Two Spirit Michif Local, which was the first Two-Spirit or queer local as part of the Métis Nation governance structure in Canada. So that was a really, I think, a really big deal and a really important support for our community. And I've been working towards my master's for what feels like a million years, and I finally submitted it at the beginning of the week, so I'm super excited to almost be done that. And so my research actually focuses on women and Two-Spirit, Métis women and Two-Spirit peoples relationships with Winnipeg. And so I'm a land-based educator and I work in the Community Engaged Learning Office at the University of Manitoba. And in that capacity, my work sort of centers around Indigenous community engagement and land-based education. So thank you.
Wow, lim lump folks, lim lump. And visually for the folks in attendance, me, Percy Weiss, Gwista, and Chichin, Scalok, and we, Percy. I continue to be an invited guest in the Dish with One Spoon here in Toronto. I took a 2-year stint to be in Treaty 1 and been in Circle and Ceremony with both of you folks, Nicki and Chantal, but I'm back here. I have, what do I have? My roles and responsibilities. I was born into a family of firekeepers. I was born, I'm a hereditary chief. What else? Oh, again, I'm the chair of Indigenous Studies at Wilfrid Laurier University. Yeah, someone should have told me don't accept a tenure track admin position before you go up for tenure. So that's also what I'm doing this May as I'm on vacation. It's not really much of a vacation. And I want to create opportunities for conversation with my relatives and kin. And I've done so for a season and a half, and I look forward to relationships and yeah, and I have some relatives and relatives in attendance. Thank you for coming, folks, continually. So I have conversations. I'm going to do it popcorn style or salmon style because it's the first spring salmon is coming and folks are coming up, and the yellow buttercup. I was sent to things in my own territory, and that's when our hunters can't hunt because we're supporting our four-legged ones to have children of their own. So we would feast on salmon. So here's an opportunity, folks. Yeah, for you to engage in this question piece, and I'll put myself on mute.
The first thing that comes into my mind is fluidity. Fluidity, expansiveness, and choice. Because I think about chosen family and the basis of it all being a choice and being chosen regardless of blood relation or not. I think that we still have to and make conscious decisions to choose each other and care for each other and hold each other accountable. I always think of it fluid as to who comes in and out of our lives. Even now that we're caregiving for our nibbling who is turning 3 in July, is, this spirit, this old spirit that has now joined us in this realm. And it's that connection, like honoring those connections and being open to seeing that and recognizing each other and changing each other through that process.
So when I think about what does family mean to me, so I think about, me and Nicki and our toddler, who is not quite 2 years old yet. And I think about how we exist as a Two-Spirit Michif Métis family in relation to like our ancestors and our larger community. And I think about how our daughter, and like thinking beyond biology as well, recognizing that for our daughter, like both of our ancestors are ancestors for our daughter, regardless of like who carried the baby, and that we're fortunate that our family, you know, recognizes and honors that alongside with us. And we understand that, like, so ceremony is a big part of our lives, and we're doing our best to raise our daughter in ceremony. And we understand that like spirit and our ancestors recognize our daughter as our daughter. We've had like legal recognition as well, as kind of ceremonial, and that we have ongoing relationships with our Métis home communities. Nicki mentioned Lwrds, we both mentioned Saint Vital, I mentioned Saint-Laurent as well. We also are fortunate to be like a 2S Métis family embedded in our nation, like in the Métis nation. So we're both like quite active in like Métis politics and Métis culture in our area. And so if it weren't for COVID, you know, we'd be gathering in community so much more. So we're trying to do our best to find opportunities to connect. And that's often meant, you know, through Zoom. We've kept like a pretty tight bubble during COVID just because like babies are not eligible for the vaccine yet. But we're excited to introduce our baby to our spiritual communities as well. So like our daughter has already been to like my Sundance last year. And so we weren't able to get to Nicki's Sundance last year for COVID reasons. But those are some of the things that come to mind when I think about family.
I think for me, as I reflect on the question today, and as I wear this sweater, I think of, you know, protecting trans kids and and you know what it meant to be a trans little way back when, and you know what are the things that I needed back then that I never received, and what are the things that I did receive, and now being a trans person as a caregiver to a little, and being that representation in his life, and yeah, like I think about, it's interesting, like I think about the moments with him when he calls me mommy, and sometimes he calls me daddy, and it's like, so gender is so fluid for him, and I'm so curious like what he sees when he's interacting with us in that way. And like so yeah, I definitely today, this question really makes me think about trans kids and trans caregivers, and especially politically with things happening, transphobic things that are coming into play. And so yeah, I have that in mind today with this question.
Yeah, I think, you know, when I was reflecting on this question earlier too, I think I sort of landed somewhere really close maybe to Lwrds, that there's this choice that we make, right? That there's this shared experience, this shared love that people have that I think matters more than any, you know, than what the particular constellation of relationships might look like, right? So, you know, the number of people or what those people might look like and what their bodies might look like, I think is less important. And I also agree that, you know, I think that, you know, these 2S queer families, it's really about queering this idea of family as being about biology or blood ties, when really it's about these kinship structures that are based on something I think much deeper, right? Something metaphysical, something spiritual. And so I think, you know, it's like what Chantal was talking about, this idea that my ancestors, you know, despite the fact that I didn't carry Mire, and that, we don't share these sort of blood ties, that my ancestors recognize Mire as their own. They claim her, right? And they're there in those ceremonies. They were there in these ceremonies, when we were married, and they're there in these ceremonies that we've had for Mire as she's sort of, come up in her like feet touch the earth ceremony and her walking out ceremony, and all these other things that we've participated in, I think. So I think that sort of that idea, that my ancestors claim her as much as Chantal's do, is like reinforces this idea that I think blood matters very little in the whole scheme of things. I mean, frankly, like sometimes I'm surprised when I remember that like I don't have this sort of biological relationship with Mire. I was just chatting with a friend last week, and I said, yeah, she's so tall. I wonder where this comes from, because Chantal's kind of a little large. And she said, well, you're really tall. And I said, yeah, that's right. I am tall. And then it took us like 5 minutes later in the conversation, I was like, oh wait, like that probably doesn't matter, right? But so anyway, so I think, yeah, that's sort of where I landed too.
Yeah, and I know, just to help not fill some space, but to share. I know one thing, I'm looking at the children that I'm responsible for here. I don't have their caregiver life givers permission, and I wouldn't. But one thing that I really appreciate, and I was able to share across my social medias, because I'm feeling like this need to share trans affirming posts. And while I was at X University from 2007 to 2018, the last 2 years I was there, I had a community member, chosen family member, audit the course, audit 2 semesters with me, and it was Wednesday night, 6 to 9. And they brought their infant and their child to class. And them as a couple and parents are choosing to raise their children as non-binary. And so every time that they would come to office hours, I would be on the floor with that child because we're both non-binary, right? As someone who's trans-identified, who's trans, not, I always have to stop saying that. And they would see me, and it's important for them to see themselves reflected in their environments around. And for 3 hours, doesn't matter if we're talking about Indian residential schools, if we're talking about whatever topic related to Indigenous health or Strong Helpers teachings, they were always in my arms, and they would always look at me. And if they went back to their life giver, they would cry and want to come back into my arms. And even during our closure ceremony over a feast and being present, they needed to sit in my arms. And now, to pass it on generationally, their younger sibling attended virtually and paid attention to me without even knowing, meeting me. Well, we've seen each other, but due to COVID, they're young, and I'm immunocompromised, so it's really difficult with the bubbles. And then just another household where we have a child who was born in Treaty 1 who claimed me as one of their parents. And I often had them in my arms and whatnot. And even here, when their parents say, oh, somebody special is coming up, and they would say, is it Percy, right? Is it my Percy, right? So yeah, I have no biological, and that's not the priority for me. Like, I was never raised as a squeeze-skillock that I don't have half brothers or I don't have step. Those are the relatives who live with us. Those are the folks who engage in our protocol. They're on these lands. They're reconnecting because their parents are no longer here, or their aunts or uncles or grandparents or great-grandparents, and now they are part of our household and our responsibilities. And we're forever going to be responsible for them as siblings. So I think that's what family means for me in the context. But there's not to say that there wasn't a time as Indigenous people and anyone who's experienced colonialism in the context of nation state Canada, where there was a time when my own people confused and conflated sexuality, a gift, as stamia in my language, it's two-spirit, or minimchiuks, what it means to be trans in my language, with what happened to them either through the Indian residential school, the day schools, or scooped by people of the same sex or same gender, right? So it took about 10 years for me to help my people and my people on my homelands to say, I am a gift. Your grandchild is a gift. Your grand nibbling is a gift, right? What happened to your grandparents? you and your siblings and your cousins was about power and control, right? And to not mix those up. So there was a while when it actually wasn't perfect, when it wasn't okay, because reminding people that homophobia, transphobia, and C-sexism were the things that were brought over in the boat, and interrupting when they say, we didn't have those here. Like what, doors? Because we had pit houses, right? What do you mean? Right? So yeah, so that's the context. So I just wanted to bring that to the conversation, that it wasn't perfect, but there was an opportunity for transformative healing to understand it wasn't like this, right? And to differentiate the continual acts of violence and colonization on my scale of relatives, parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. And I know my people still struggle because they're like, pronouns, what does that mean? Right? So yeah. So again, I root everything back to ceremony. And I'm like, our language is not gendered. You know, when we talk about this story, those two relatives, those animal relatives, were not just friends, they were partners, right? So I root everything in the ceremony to help them come to not continue to look through homophobia or fear of who I am or other relatives are. Oh, so yes, if folks can and have knowledge or experience, here's another prompter for you.
Okay, so some barriers that we want to highlight in the context of family planning. So navigating a healthcare system that wasn't designed for Indigenous people, wasn't designed for queer people, queer families, queer family planning, having to explain that, no, we're not sisters, like at every appointment that we go to. So having to come out all the time. I dream of a day where the healthcare system won't require us to come out. They won't have assumptions about what family means, and they'll just listen to us and hear our story and provide resources in a way that makes sense to us. Some of the other things that we've encountered have been like the colonial impacts on our health. And like the lack of, we really wanted an Indigenous midwife. And we learned early on that there are not many anymore. And sometimes even when there are a few, they're no longer practicing, or like it's really difficult to navigate that system and have access. Like not everybody who wants to work with a midwife gets to work with one. We were fortunate to have a really great team of midwives. None of them were Indigenous, but one was queer, and we were really grateful for that. And that queer person also had family, so we were able to connect with like their, you know, having gone through the system as well. That was helpful for us. Also navigating like a justice system that wasn't created for us or created with us in mind. So when I spoke earlier, I mentioned that, you know, our family is recognized by spirit and in ceremony, but also legally. So the way that it worked in Manitoba was we essentially had to both adopt our own daughter to be recognized as legal parents, both of us. Like, so we think that's ridiculous, first of all, but we did it because, you know, like what if something happened to the birth parent? The other parent needs to have like legal capacity to care for the child. So we had to navigate that process, which was expensive as well. So we're fortunate that, you know, we had the resources, you know, and like the education needed to navigate that super white system. And after we went through that process, like very shortly after, in fact, there was like a court case in Manitoba on this very subject. The Family Maintenance Act was found to be discriminatory against families that are made through accessing like fertility services. And that like disproportionately was impacting queer folks, queer families. So that case was successful. And so now I think Manitoba is like behind when it comes to this. There's other provinces that already, like the definition of parent in those provincial acts is not tied to like gender and sexuality. So now I guess our province is playing catch up and they're going to have to update those definitions. However, like, so we had to work with a lawyer. And there too, we were fortunate, like she's not Indigenous, but she's queer and she had to go through this. So like finding, you know, these relationships along the way has been helpful. But she basically said, it's still a good thing that you went through the process, because even though that one act is now being updated, the other acts are still discriminating against families like us. Like, for example, the Wills Act, like those like definitions of families and caregivers are gendered and discriminate against like queer families. So we still have work to do. The justice system still has work to do to catch up in that way. So those are some of the things that like we've dealt with, some of the barriers.
I think for me, I mean, we haven't dove into family planning. We have conversations in terms of us having our own children. But I think for me, the question brings up in more recent years, I've had like the thought and the desire to be pregnant, to be a birthing person, and it's kind of been a scare, like a little nervous topic in terms of what how our blood family would be supportive or not. I know that I've brought up the topic a couple of times with my mother specifically, and she kind of like avoided the topic or, you know, changed the subject, and I feel like that it's always been like disheartening and you know, just sad feels, because I feel like if my sister would talk about wanting to have a baby, it would be a different conversation. So yeah, that's been on my mind the last few years, of like how I know that I am in a community that I would be really held and really supported and really like yeah, just like guided through the process and the journey. But I think the questions that I have around our families is something that holds me back from like really kind of going forward with that process. So,
yeah, I think like family and the medical, and how often they intersect because of medicalization of so many different aspects of our lives. I just, as like Milo was sharing about just their conversations with their mom, surprisingly, then also recently, like my mom brought up as having children and Milo carrying the baby, like, oh, you can be pregnant, right? Like just casually, and we're like, yeah, blah 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 blah, just carrying on that conversation, like, yeah, of course. Because it had been, and at that moment, just that came up very casually, normal, nothing, no big deal. Was like, it was so meaningful because I had been holding that, it had such a weight, I guess, and like in my heart, in the back of my mind, that fear of being rejected, like that rejection that like seems to have been happening and that had happened with me, you know, in my own queerness, my own transness. And so then since we had met and been together, I have been as protective as I am about just myself and my heart. I've been even more protective about my lows. And so then I then gear myself up for all these arguments, right? I'm like, they're gonna be terrible. So, you know, I'm ready. And that didn't happen. And suddenly throughout this whole process and knowing us and knowing, you know, her own child, she came to that on her own. Well, not completely on her own, because of course it's all part of, you know, what we have been doing and the labor that so many other two-spirit queer trans people have been doing, and her having access to that. And suddenly that was normal for her. And this also connecting to and coming from, I had a hysterectomy and a oophorectomy. So my uterus, my ovaries, had a surgery to remove those a few years ago. I think is it going on 3 years. And that immediately put me into surgical menopause. So then it was something that I needed to do for my body, for my gender, and my physical well-being and my emotional well-being. And the whole process it was just very intense, and finding a doctor who supported me, finding a surgeon who supported me, finding an endocrinologist who supported me. It was just so much. And so having that conversation with her as I was going to go into surgery, I waited 1 month before the surgery to tell her, like, this is happening. And her grieving that I wouldn't be pregnant was a thing. Well, at the same time, so it's having to hold that for her while also grieving that for myself, even though I had thought forever that I didn't want to carry. If I was going to have children, me being pregnant wasn't something that was an option for my body. And yet knowing that finally I was going to get this was going to happen, it just threw me. And I grieved so much this child that was there, that I could feel so close. And that made me second guess my decision, but I still went through with it. But I could feel a child so close, and having to process whether I was discarding a gift and what that meant. And so that it was just such a process. And to make a long story short, as I was speaking to my mom that 1 month right before, she was trying to convince me, like, just have one kid and then have the surgery. And I was like, I don't think that's gonna work out. Like, that's not how it's gonna work. But at the end, you know, she understood, it was fine. 1 month later, I have my surgery, and then the next day, my sister called me to tell me that she was pregnant. She was 1 month along, and completely unplanned. It just happened with somebody who she had just met too, hilariously. So and she was going to be having this child, and so what I felt in that moment, it was one of the most intense, I think, physical and emotional and spiritual reactions. I could see this child. I could feel just this child's energy, just how funny they were. I started laughing because they were so funny. And I could see them, I could feel them, and I recognized in that moment that I was right, that there was this child, but that it wasn't going to be coming through me. But it was still someone who was very much connected to us, and that now that we're almost 3 years, we have been primary caregivers for. And he's hilarious. He's so funny. So that energy, everything, how I saw him, how I felt him in that moment that she found out she was pregnant, that's exactly how he is today. And yeah, so all of that to say, like, Percy was naming all of these like metaphysical ways and these connections that we have and how it all happens in the spirit realm, and we're making them a material reality. It's something that's very real. Like for me as like a queer, trans, intersex person, this is exactly how he was meant to come into our lives and for us to care for him. That he chose us very clearly, and it felt like a type of ceremony for me to offer this type of sacrifice for him to come through, you know. Yeah.
I just thank you both for sharing your experience. There are things that are resonating for me that are really fresh, so I'm not going to talk about them because I'm emotional, but thank you for sharing that. I wanted to quickly talk about like what our experience of trying to find a donor. When we first started, trying to sort of bring our little earth angel into the world. And so it's really unfortunate that there are no Indigenous donors in Canada at all. And the process for using a known donor is so onerous and burdensome that it's like almost impossible, frankly, because of like the expectations that they have just as an example, then if you chose a known, like let's say we selected a friend or a sort of a close trusted individual to play that role in our child's life, they had to fly to Toronto to get this special testing twice over the course of a year. And it was like these kind of burdens that it would be so difficult to ask somebody to take on. And so we had to make the decision to use, an anonymous donor from the United States because those were our options. But I think we just found somebody just really amazing. So we got really lucky. We were able to find an Indigenous donor in the United States, but it was, it's impossible to find that here in Canada, which was sort of a bummer. And then I had just wanted to kind of tack on to what Chantal had been talking about the midwives. So within Winnipeg, there are no Indigenous midwives, at least not when we sort of went through that. And they are right now in the middle of an Indigenous midwife training. They're sort of preparing professional midwives, Indigenous midwives, which is amazing. But at the time, like Chantal said, we were working with a team of non-Indigenous women, but one woman was queer. And I will say that working with that woman was such a gift because we were able to have all of these really informative conversations about, breastfeeding and chest feeding as a non-biological parent that I think we might not have been able to have had we, been with a straight or, straight OBGYN or straight midwives, because she was informed, right? And she had these experiences herself that she was able to share with us when we were like wanting to talk about these things that typically queer families might experience, like chest feeding and breastfeeding. So I just think having access to these midwives is so important, and getting more Indigenous midwives and more queer midwives too is important. And obviously, awareness, two-spirit awareness, queer awareness for like straight folks working in this field as well is really important. So, but and then Chantal sort of talked about this heteronormativity that we experienced in the medical system, and it's true. It's like constantly we were like, no, we're not sisters, we're wives, and like folks were like, really? Yes. And I remember we had been told constantly that we wouldn't be able to leave the hospital until the birth certificate, you have to sign the papers. They won't let you leave. You need a name. You got to sign the papers. So every time a nurse would come in, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to sign them any second, I promise, And then I remember this nurse coming in and she was like, don't worry about it. Like, bring it home, then the father can like sign. And I was like, there's no father. Like, it's me, the woman who's been in the hospital with this woman for 3 days caring for this baby, so I think and it was so funny, it was like, how had they arrived at this idea that I was just like a sister helping out, but anyways, alleviating those were sort of some barriers that we experienced.
Yeah, I know, just briefly, I've had a DNC before, and it's impacted my desire to want to engage with the medical model system, and it's been over 30 years now. But I know when I first got with my partner, we had discussed and had quite a few arguments because as a registered status member, I have to, I at the time feel because of all the, do I have a place to go home to? Housing is an issue and a job is an issue. And do I want to bring my partner and or our children back to a place that might not recognize them as the parent? Right? Because they're not status, they don't have membership within our custom code, and they're not Indigenous, right? And I also had to think about donors as well. If I was going to carry, and then if my partner was going to carry one of my many, at the time I had 10 brothers, and they refused, but yet they will have, go to tournaments and have children out of those interactions, right? And so I also, it had impacted me from that time is there's like the notion of being weighted to death, having an absolute mistrust and fear of the medical model system is what I have personal experience with, not only as a Squeesty Scallock as an Indigenous person, because I've had two grandparents, grandfathers, I'll genderize them, about 6 uncles and 3 brothers. And my brother who passed away in April, and my brother who passed away in August, and then my brother who passed away when I was in Winnipeg in November 2018, were weighted to death, meaning because they were Indigenous, they were labeled a particular way, wanted help, did not get it, were sent away, and they passed away. So those are very real fears that impacted my unwillingness to engage in the medical model system. And those were very real systemic and structural ongoing acts of colonialism and genocide against me and all of my intersecting identities. I didn't even want to consider what it meant to be a gender diverse person engaging in the medical model system. I mean, while I was in Winnipeg, it took me up until the last 2 months, 4 months before I left, to find a medical practitioner, right? Like it just was not possible. So yeah, just to support me for my overall wellness, let alone family planning for myself and my partner. So yeah, so which brings us to the next question. Prompter, what does centering 2SLGBTQQIA families look like to you?
No one wants to go first. Okay, so some ideas on what does centering 2S families look like to me. Basically ensuring that we're always represented in every context, in every institution, like ideally, in every instance, like I mentioned, dreaming of a day where we don't have to come out anymore and people aren't so like obsessed about figuring out people's gender and sexuality, and just like an openness about the fact that families come in all different shapes and sizes and colors and configurations and numbers, and finding beauty in that instead of being fearful of it, avoiding tokenism, making sure, I know, like in this era of indigenization, like institutions and organizations are keen to make efforts, but sometimes, like make sure you invite more than one queer person, more than one Indigenous person. Make sure you don't, make sure you've got an eye for diverse representation. Don't just invite a queer person or an Indigenous person that like is white passing because you feel less threatened by them. There should be much diversity in your midst. Let's see, I wrote down a couple things here. So like training and education on 2S realities for employees of all major institutions, government included. Assist us with advocating for our rights if we ask for help, if we need it or want it. invite us to be part of the planning, the organizing, the development of programs and initiatives, instead of adding us on like as an afterthought afterwards, which happens too often. A few years ago, I was involved with, I co-hosted a national conference called Two-Spirit and Queer Trans People of Color, a call to conversation with LGBT and allies at the University of Winnipeg. It was like such an amazing gathering of folks. But I just wanted to mention that, so as a part of that like 3-day event, there's like 150 delegates, and there was like great representation at that particular event. And we worked collaboratively there to come up with calls to action, which can be found online if you just Google it. But folks had really insightful things that address like how to better 2SQTPOC lives in like across various institutions, but also like what individuals can do, our families, communities, settler folks. So if people are interested or curious, I would encourage folks to take a look at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe I'll just sneak in here because I only really have one extra or other point to make, I should say, really, that, you know, I think that centering families really means, you know, queering education. So like, you know, both addressing heteropatriarchy in what we're actually learning, but this also overrepresentation of like, you know, like heteronormative families that children are like, I never want our daughter Mireille to feel othered or to feel, you know, strange or anything more than, you know, proud and just, you know, like, I don't want to use words like normal or whatever, but I don't want her to feel, you know, because she has 2 moms that, you know, she's different than these other kids. And so, and I guess maybe like one of the ways that we are working towards that here in our own home is that like we've been lucky enough and frankly privileged enough to be able to build Mireille a library that is like filled with queer BIPOC books. And I meant to bring them in here to show folks, but I can grab some later too if folks are interested. But really, I think, you know, it's like she spends her days reading about, you know, these, you know, queer princesses who are fighting dragon, and like, and I mean, you know, like it's just, I think this way, these things we never got as kids, right? We never got for this to be normalized. And so like, I hope that for her that this is totally normalized. And I think like within education, we have a lot to do because that's where kids are being socialized, right? So, and that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Yeah, connecting like onto that, just for me is we've been talking about like just blowing up the toxic notion of the nuclear family, you know, which is, it's this heteropatriarchal, like capitalist white supremacist. Because like two people, just having 2 people for one small like new child for any like to raise children is not enough. And there are plenty of studies nowadays that say that at the same time, things that we have known, that our bodies know, that our spirits know, that our peoples have known for generations, and it got interrupted with colonization. That a child just is able to form secure attachments when they have 3, 4, 5, 10 people that they know they can rely on, like adults to look to, who are different, you know, and I think like our queerness in that, our transness, our gender expansiveness is a gift to our nibbling, and he's a gift to us, the way that he then reflects that world. Yeah, like we've been talking so much around how if this idea wasn't so pervasive that you have to have this nuclear family, that, for example, my sister as a single parent, she needs to be able to do it all of it by herself. And if she cannot, there's shame that comes with that. And how could that be anything other than toxic to herself as a person, as an individual, and then as a mother trying to care for this child, when there are more people in our family who have been just like us stepping up to fill in when she needs it, to just be also caregivers. And it just creates this different little family units within a larger unit, like the way that we are a family together, we are a family with him, and she's a family with him, and that intersects with us, and he has his family with his father, and that intersects in different ways. And it's all about being able to honor that and to center that. And I think that us coming into this with our queer perspectives and our queer life experiences, having been othered constantly, it helps you to recognize all of the ways in which things should be and can be and have been different.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing too, for me too. Like even just today, I went to an appointment with Lwrds' sister at Sick Kids, and the entire time, all the nurses and everybody that was there was referring to me as daddy, like automatically, didn't ask me. And so it's just like, why is it just that? Like, why is it just mommy and daddy? And why can't it be expansive? Why can't it be like, why can't you ask me like, who am I and what are my pronouns, and like all this idea that like is so frustrating, where it's like you can feel that things and conversations have come so far, and then you're just kind of back at, the basic. The very basic. So yeah, definitely like centering us as families. It's just about expansiveness and yeah, everything you said.
Yeah, I think when I accepted the offer to work at University of Manitoba, I was heartbroken, and I had started because I was involved in the little nibblings who chose me as their parent and caregiver as non-binary, that I actually grieved that relationship over being in Toronto. And I was set on not going around any other children because I was traumatized as someone who was scooped in the 60s and already has attachment and trauma form, like trauma reactions to relationships that end, right? But not also having to recenter, okay, things happen for a purpose, they outgrew, something else is coming as a firekeeper, but still that trauma. And I know when the child who chose me next, Nathan, who says I'm their special person and I'm specifically for them, that I refused to see them for a good 6 weeks. And once I held him in my arm, we kind of imprinted on each other, and we were always together. And so that made it much easier, our decision to move house, because of a job and a lot of other things, but to come back to the now 5 children that we have in our lives here, that are a huge part of our lives. But what's made it complicated, I'm immunocompromised. And so, and as they're going to daycare, I haven't been able to access them other than FaceTime, and right. So yeah, the centering families is technology. I'm grateful for technology, that I can still continue to be safe in my household, which is my partner and I, pretty much that's it. And that the children in their households can be safe as well, because 2 of the children are immunocompromised. So which again, centering families means adjusting. And I know that I always felt like there was something wrong with me, because part of my teachings, and it's not part of every Indigenous person on Turtle Island, is that children choose you. Well, these children did choose me. They didn't come out of my body, but our spirits are definitely connected. And I know when I talk with my family, I say, well, you have 5 more niblets, and these are their names. And they're like, oh, they didn't go, what did men give birth? Like, did like, we don't understand. They're like, oh, okay, well, we can't wait to meet them. right? So let's experience of what centering and what has looked like and what it means coming into choice, like the choice they chose me. So to help us with our, if you could share something that some celebrations and joy you'd like to share around family.
So I think for me, like so yeah, like we've been pretty much like part of primary care from the time our nibbling was born. But this past month, circumstances happened and we had to be full-time with him. And it was a lot to adjust really quickly, and a lot of just like unexpectedness happened. And I think he, like, definitely the first week that he was with us, a lot of adjustment for him, and it was hard on him, and so definitely the first 2-3 days were really, really tough, and he was very, like, disoriented and just like upset, and we just had to figure out how to help him. And at the kind of midway point, I reached out through social media to friends and family and chosen family, and just to kind of share, because the first 2 weeks I felt like we were just like in our bubble of like, just focus on him and trying to figure out like how to navigate this like circumstance. And I had this feeling to like reach out, and so I did, and the response that we received was just so like beautiful and magical, and just like speaks to what we're talking about today, about expansiveness, about what family means, and just the ways that people showed up, ways that community showed up, like sending us food, sending us toys, sending us advice, asking us how we're doing, reminding us that that we were doing the best that we can, and like that it's okay to be upset in the moments that are hard, and just like it was just like a beautiful response that I'm so grateful for, and that it's like it just kind of like that reminder of like what Lwrds was speaking to, that it's so easy because of colonization and the way things have been set up, that like it's easy to end up in those isolating spaces with children, that it's just like we have to do this and we're doing this on our own, but it's like bigger than that. We can reach out. And so that, I think that for me was the biggest thing that I wanted to share with this question. That was really powerful.
Yeah. And seeing him and like his, like the way that he has been lately, like identifying us as his caregivers. We would be like watching some videos that he likes, and it's like a parent figure, and it's kind of like abstracted, videos that we'll watch, and he likes chill beats, right? So then there'll be like this caregiver and this like baby. He'll be like, oh, this is your little parent and baby, and he would identify himself with the baby, and then the parent person would shift from being his mommy to being his Mino, or he calls me Lwrds, so he goes, it's Lwrds and baby, it's Mino and baby, it's mommy and baby, and then he would just be like circling through to just name that we're his caregivers too, we are his parents in all of these different ways that he claims us as such, and he feels safe and cared for and witnessed, which is what we strive to do, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking, when I was sort of looking at this question, I started thinking about, you know, this like this shaming that you mentioned as well. I think that happens around like parenting. And I was thinking about, you know, that like we have this toxic tendency to pretend like everything's fine and dandy all the time, lest we be shamed, you know, for being a bad parent for whatever reason. So, you know, I mean, I'm happy to admit that, maybe not happy, but I will admit that parenting is freaking hard, right? Like that you know, we're all like, it was such a beautiful, that birth was such a beautiful moment. No, it wasn't. It was horrible. It hurt. You know, it was a nightmare. Like we're all going to pretend that it happened, but you end up with this beautiful gift at the end, right? And so maybe in the big picture, but I think like we do a disservice when we like tell these stories about what parenthood, you know, what we maybe want or expect it to be rather than what it is. And it's really hard. But there are these amazing moments, right? And these beautiful moments. But in those hard moments, Chantal and I have this mantra, you know, those moments where like you just got to kind of stick her in front of the TV because you need a few minutes or whatever. We look at each other and we say, yeah, still good moms. Still good moms. And that's this mantra that's sort of carried us through the last couple of years. But I will say this though as well, that Mireille is a very easy baby. You know, she's a great baby. She's a, you know, a good sleeper and all that. So we've been very lucky. We've also been really lucky to be home with her for the last 2 years, right? It's an opportunity that most parents, most caregivers don't get, right? Is to be able to stay home for so long, you know, with their partner, and to be there with the baby as you know, she's developing and learning and growing. So yeah, I guess I'll just say that, yeah, that's the silver lining to the last 2 years of COVID. But I guess I'll just say that, yeah, she's good medicine.
So I completely echo all of that. Another celebration that I wanted to bring up was, you know, just like that our relationship is also medicine, and that, you know, we had like a Widigewin, like a traditional like a Midewiwin two-spirit wedding ceremony, and it was really important for us to have that, and it was before COVID, so we actually could have people there safely, and I just feel like that was like such a beautiful celebration of our love and our like commitment to each other, and to have our loved ones present and participating. It was like we had to prepare for a year, and our families were really involved with that as well. So our families like ceremonied with us to help get us ready for this commitment. And as I feel like it's like extra special, not just because we're queer, but also because we're Métis. And like, so part of my work is like talking about how colonization has really impacted Métis people's relationships with ceremony and like forcibly disconnected us. And so with our Widigewin, I feel like we are like reclaiming that relationship. And I feel like that helped us to get ready for our daughter to arrive. And other ceremonies that we've participated like with a mind and heart towards preparing ourselves to have a being choose us, like Percy said. We carry those teachings as well. And yeah, she just is the best medicine. Gosh, these past couple of years with COVID have been just so challenging. But I mean, yeah, so we're doing our best to raise her in ceremonies, and I just can't wait for babies to be eligible for the vaccine, because like I want to get back. Yeah. We have like such a big, beautiful community, and like there's like hundreds of people at our sun dances, and I want to go there and feel safe and like feel like our baby is safe. So yeah, those are some things that come to mind.
Yeah, I know with my partner and I, they're a racialized person, a racialized queer settler. I think the celebrations that we have as caregivers is decolonial love in the sense that we really embody those things in all its messy ways that it can be, because it's to no longer uphold the logics of white supremacy and heteropatriarchy. It's messy to know that there are gifts underneath here, and what are they, and how am I not internalizing those, and how am I not projecting those on my partner, and we have consensual solidarity, right? Not only with each other, but with the families who birth these gifts, who are part of our lives as caregivers, and that it's consensual, not only with spirit, but with the land, and guests, right? They're guests, and I continue to be a guest here as well, because we're not in my homelands. And so those things kind of walk hand in hand. So things to think about that bring us joy, that we have informed relationships that are about, let's find out through this hot mess to be caring, loving relatives and kin, at the end of the day, supporting these beings to be good relatives, right? And uphold the treaties and responsibilities to those things. So yeah, so those are the joys I'm grateful to be part of, and these children choosing me. And 2 of them are being raised as non-binary until they tell the world who they are, right? And so that is so joyful and painful at the same time. It's bittersweet in the sense that I knew who I was when I was 4. I didn't have the language, but as an adult, I could look back. And I think that's why I told the world who I was at a later age, because of a lot of the internalized homophobia, or transphobia in this case, and C-sexism. But yeah, so I'm grateful that these children were brought into my life to help remind me in loving ways. These are ways in which you could stand in your honor and be celebrated through all creation and all your relationships. Closing responses. I left it with the folks, and I want to thank you for that. And just to be an ethical person who's moderating potentially a conversation that might stir or move things for you. Here's some resources for you. And I want to thank you folks again for your stories, your experiences, your lived realities. I came with a cup half empty, but I have water that now my cup is full, and thank you so much for that. And hopefully people in attendance, it will help you support our relatives and reduce the harms when it comes to queer families, caregivers, children, and what things you can do to actualize joy and families to be celebrated. And come, please, folks. I'm always about futurities, and reimagining another future is possible. April 6th, I know it's really short turnaround, but youth, I want to honor and raise up young people. So I have 3 confirmed speakers. I'm waiting for a 4th, but I invite you to come back, find it online. And until next time, white, raise my hands up to you folks.
Thank you.